So my mom's hardcore Catholic. God love her. I love her. So naturally, my dad, he grew up kind of as a Baptist, So I'm a cactus, You get one joke, that's it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of PsychoActivision Presents. I'm your host, Peter Strickland, and we've got another wonderful interview for you today. Before we get started, I wanted to ask that if you're watching this video on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to our PsychoActivision YouTube channel. You can find a playlist there with all of the interviews that we've done with musicians, videographers, and creatives all alike. You can also find our music videos. There's a playlist of those. There's visuals that we've made and all sorts of stuff to explore. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at PsychoActivision. For today's episode, I am really excited because I'm making my first, doing my first interview with someone who is making music in the country music genre. I've never done a country music interview before. Really excited for it. B.B. Palmer. What's up, man? I'm happy to have you here.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me, Pete. Appreciate it, brother.
So before we get started on, the interview, the conversation and everything, I wanted to ask if you wanted to plug anything like your Instagram, or you have an album coming out. I think that's probably the number one thing you should plug.
Yes, I do have an album coming out. And also I'm starting a brand of toilet paper. It's going to be in Walmart. You'll see my face on it. Just kidding. I'll have to wait for that one. But yeah, so the record, we'll plug the record. So we got a record that's coming out August 19th. It's called Krishna Country Gold. I brought the divine with me today.
Nice.
So in spirit. So it's a fusion record. So it's basically we're taking Vedic instruments from the East and combining it with Western country music or whatever we do. So yeah.
I really appreciate that. That maybe we'll start the conversation with that. I'd say the number one, like the standout thing when I listen to your music is that Eastern influence. And I think that, even going back to your album from 2019, it's maybe not as obvious on that album, but I think on your newer stuff that I've heard so far, it's pretty unmistakable that there's, like you said, a fusion. There's like a good mixture of genres going on.
Yeah, definitely. You're right though about the 2019 album, because we used, electric sitar guitars, but we
gotcha.
Placed them, in the background. It wasn't the primary, thing. But that was starting to kind of build and experiment a little bit on that record, and this is like the full realization, basically, the new record coming out. So
that's awesome, man. I think I want to start maybe, we just talked about that, and we're going to talk about that more, but I think maybe a good way to really start our conversation and kind of get into, the whole meat and potatoes of everything. Tell me where you're originally from and how you started playing music.
Okay. This lifetime, let's see, I grew up in pretty much in between Theodore, Alabama and Mobile, Alabama. Mm-hmm. There's a place called Dolphin Island Parkway that, I grew up in the city down in Mobile, but also grew up, on the west side of Mobile Bay and in between Dolphin Island Parkway. So that's where I was born, pretty much Mobile, Alabama,
mm-hmm.
But on the kind of the west side of the bay down there.
Nice. Do you identify with that? Like, do you, because we're going to talk about this a little bit in the later part of the conversation, but I, saw online that you grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
Which, I grew up Catholic too, but the weird thing is mine was not, yours sounds a bit more traditional for the South, and here's what I mean, because Mobile has a very big Catholic influence, and there's just so much,
doubt.
But I grew up in Opelika, Alabama, and there's one Catholic church. Well, actually, there's two Catholic churches in this whole area.
Two now, yeah.
But altogether, they're not huge. It's not like churches you would go to.
Like
even
the cathedral in downtown.
Exactly. Yeah. Or even I've been to places in Birmingham where the churches are huge and there's like a huge congregation there. And I don't know. I guess my point is, you growing up Catholic, that also screams to me like, oh yeah, South Alabama. That's
yeah, for sure. It's a big part of the culture down there. Growing up Catholic, my mom was one of 9 children who grew up in an all Catholic family.
Wow, yeah.
So my mom's hardcore Catholic. God love her, I love her. So naturally, my dad, he's not really. If he grew up kind of as a Baptist, So I'm a cactus, You get one joke, that's it. That's my joke. But anyway, so my dad actually converted to Catholicism when me and my sister were already like been in that mug for 9 years. We had done our confirmation. So we were teaching I remember teaching my dad like the Hail Mary and the Glory Bees and the Beatitudes and all that. And so, so that's, but you're right about Mobile being super, super Catholic. It is.
Well, and like, so like, like I said, I grew up around here, around the Auburn Opelika area, and my parents, were raised Methodist and Baptist, and they became Catholic, which is, that's not a very common story. No. And then they had 8 kids though, so I'm one of 8. So I mean,
wow.
it is
so you know that life.
Yeah, I do know that life. But thankfully, my dad usually had, he usually had pretty good jobs to where, this is a weird way to put it, but I'm happy we were not like, some of the families I saw where they had 8 kids, but they didn't have enough money. Man, where they're
a lot of those families out there, without the means to raise 8 children.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I I still had hand-me-downs, but it wasn't, and I don't always shared a bedroom, but like you talk to other people where you're like, oh, you shared a room with like 3 or 4 people, and 6, shared a bed, because things like that, and so
no doubt.
And I mean, there's stories like that also from people who grew up in the Great Depression. It's kind of weird making that parallel, but
sure is, ma'am. You're right about that.
But anyway, so let's talk about music then. How did you first start playing music?
I first started playing music because my dad played guitar and sang, and he's a really good singer, much better than me. But he, I grew up with him having the guitar around when I was like 11 or 12. I heard him playing Secret Agent Man. And so I didn't give a damn about the song, but I love something with me clicked with the opening riff, And so I was like, oh man, I was like, Dad, you gotta teach me that. Please teach me that. He's like, okay. He's like, you never really cared about this guitar before, but he's like, all right, I'll teach it to you. So he taught me what to do. And I swear he'll corroborate this when we talk about it to this day. He's like, man, I remember you being upstairs back, boom, dip, boom, boom, dip, boom. And it took me about a month to get that little riff. Yeah. And I came down the stairs. I was like, I learned it. And from there it just took off. Nice. I fell in love with guitar, and so that's how I started playing music.
How about early influences then? Because, that's kind of a fun,
that is fun.
That's kind of a fun first song to be really, into. But since you're, here's actually a fun question. It's a little bit different from, instead of country music, I want to know, what music did you listen to growing up that was not country, that is an influence on you now?
Great question, because none of it was country, brother. I fell in love with country 10 years ago. I'm 35, so that's in crazy, my early 20s. And so my dad had a really eclectic taste in music, which I'm super thankful for. But he was an R&B guy, he listened to new R&B, like 90s neo soul, D'Angelo, Erykah Badu, nice. You know what I'm saying? Maxwell, and Prince. First concert I ever went to was with my dad. I was 9 years old. Prince.
That's pretty badass, dude.
Pretty amazing, right? And so, but he also liked the old stuff, like the 60s, 70s stack R&B, like Otis Redding, Al Green. you know. But he also was into the bands like America and those bands that kind of like had that Southwestern. Not the Eagles, because I stand by the dude about the Eagles. The Eagles suck. So thankfully there were no, you know, they don't suck. But you know what I mean? They commercialize it basically. But
I totally get it. Like I think the problem is once you've heard something way too many times, like you eventually started to hold a grudge against. Like that's why I don't like pop music, and that's why I don't like the Eagles. Is that I've worked at so many places that played at Hotel California like 2 or 3 times every shift. So I'm like, I will never like them again.
Right, you can't. But the sad thing is there's so much better songs by the Eagles, obviously. That's always how it works out. But yeah, so my dad, you know, and my mom she was very singular. She listened to James Taylor and only James Taylor. So I got to hear how a songwriter writes songs, because in my opinion, James Taylor's like one of the greatest songwriters of all time.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And so I got to hear, you know, that from an early age. And so between, you know, my mom and my dad and my brother, who's 12 years older than me, he's a deadhead. He toured with Panic doing like setup design, like widespread.
Nice.
And so I got to see that too. So, and then I went to an all-black school growing up. Mm-hmm. So Linecoff Elementary down in Mobile, Alabama, I was one of 10 white boys in the whole school. Mm-hmm. And so I got to see, you know, growing up down there next to Linecoff, you know, I go visit I go to my black friend's house and see how they live, which is completely different than how we live, you know, as it is, you know, especially so in the early 90s. So I got to turn on to, you know, hip hop and all that, and like dance and all that. So like, you know, I've just been blessed to have a lot of different influences.
A couple things. Your dad sounds like my dad, because like I've got some of my parents' vinyls, and it's all, well, I mean, I guess my parents were a little bit more into 70s funk. Like they love Parliament, Funkadelic.
My dad too, yeah.
They love Steely Dan.
Steely Dan.
They're just like, there's certain artists, or Stevie Wonder.
Stevie Wonder, yeah.
There's certain people that they just kind of, like the heaviest my dad was willing to go ever was, he was like, I like Kiss. You know, it's about, and I'm like, I feel like that's not even heavy anymore.
It's not even heavy. Yeah, it's Kiss.
Yeah, but
love Parliament, Funkadelic though, man. Oh, yeah. I love George Clinton. So I feel you on that.
And like my dad went to Auburn High School. He graduated in, I think, 1976 or 77. He told me the year before he graduated, because the Commodores were from Tuskegee.
They played.
Or maybe it wasn't the year before, but like a few years before or something. Like imagine having the Commodores play your prom at Auburn High. Like that would have been crazy.
Right, you got Lionel Richie there singing.
Yeah, which is
singing your prom.
And I bet nobody even really understood at the time, like, well, because obviously you don't know who's going to become big. But
no, you don't.
But
that's cool though.
Which I mean is a good thing. I would say that's something that keeps some people in check, and I'm sure you've seen this over the years, where you see someone who's not really a big deal, but they act like they are, and then you're like, man, that person's not going to do well. Like,
oh man, do I ever see it? Man, all the time on the road. Yeah. You know, it's like I had experience in Tulsa a week ago with a band like that, so I'm not gonna say anything bad about any band, because anybody who's out there doing it, respect, whether you like the music or not. Respect to that person out there putting himself out there. You know?
For sure, yeah.
What I'm saying, but you're right. With the music, there comes an ego, and the ego is essential, I believe. But you gotta know when to turn that shit on and off. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
It's a hard thing to do sometimes, though.
Well, and I'll make the parallel to, like, I'm a real big fan of stand-up comedy. And
Me too.
Stand-up comedy is a big thing.
Me too, man.
Is big in that way that somebody can act like an asshole on stage if it's their act, and I might think it's hilarious. But if they're an asshole to me in the lobby when I'm just trying to say, hey, good set, man, then I'm like, and obviously there's
rubs you the wrong way.
Well, and there's different circumstances but you hear on comedy podcasts all the time, people being like, hey, I really liked this one guy, but then I opened for him and he was a total asshole. And I'm like, you can't
all the time.
Well, I'll throw someone out there that everyone knows is an asshole at this point. It's his whole act. Andrew Dice Clay, who was huge in the early 90s, he there's so many stories of him these days where he'll show up to a place and his whole attitude is like, well, I'm, a big macho badass. And I'm like, I know you're doing a shtick, but like, but at the same time, you are kind of like, you're not getting that, you're leaving a bad taste in all these young comics' mouth who like, they're never going to remember you as fondly as, you know, some of the other greats because you're making them, you know, anyway.
Right, you're right about that. I love stand-up comedy, a big Bill Hicks fan.
Nice, yeah. I only got turned on to Bill Hicks from listening to podcasts. It's only really like comedy fans and like real comedy heads that know about Bill Hicks, but as soon as I heard him even kind of like having like a, you know, bit of an accent, I was like I'm already kind of into this because he sounds like someone I grew up with, you know? So I'm like...
He's from Austin, dude. He grew up hardcore in the, what do they call it, where they go and they preach to other evangelists.
Yeah, yep.
He grew up in the evangelist, and so he turned against that, and that's why his act is what it is. You know, if you look at early Bill Hicks, or you look at interviews, you see how he is, why the way he is. But I love Bill Hicks, man. I love the joke. There's a joke Bill Hicks does about about Jesus, and it's like he's like, why do all the Christians have Jesus on a cross? Like, he's like, do you think Jesus like, oh yeah, man, I like that cross of me in the worst time of my life. You wear it around your neck, and that's how you remember Jesus. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. You know? It's like,
oh, that's hilarious.
Great joke. Anyways,
no, I mean, I think there's a. You know, we're talking about religion, so let's, you know, kind of talk about it a little bit.
Love religion, man.
Well, I was going to say, that's something that I see throughout your music, and I think it's what kind of... Actually, I'll give a little bit of a history on myself over the past year for a second. I have gone through phases of being in and out of liking country, if I'm being honest. Like, and growing up in the South, you get the best and the worst of it. Like, there's some great country music that comes through here, but there's also some like just crap that people peddle to you. And I've said this on a previous podcast, but I'll say it again. The first memory I have of being turned off by country was, you know, like I said, I grew up in the Opelika, Auburn area. I was in a car full of people going to visit the site of like the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. You know, it was like we were learning about it in history class or something. And it was like me and some like a family friend or something. We were going, and they were all big country fans. I didn't like country, you know, I didn't really know anything about it. And the song "She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy" came on like 3 times during the whole, you know, several hour ride.
Ruined it for you.
No, for real. Like, and by the end of it, they were singing along, and I was like, I can't get into it. I don't know what it is, but it just, because none of it was relatable for me, especially at
Same thing happened with me early on. Same thing happened. I heard radio country, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And so like, I was like, I don't think this is for me. And then later I was shown, you know, like Hank Williams Sr. and like, the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you know, I was showed certain artists. I was like, oh, so this is what country music is about, or this is the way I like to listen to country music. I
think that's a really good way to put it, because it's not, you don't necessarily want to trash someone's taste in country.
Man. Everybody's different.
Because like for years, for whatever reason, I was a total shithead and would shit on people for being like, why is Taylor Swift your favorite artist? Why is Ariana Grande, or why is Katy Perry? But then I was like, Peter, it's a different style of music. Because when I look at it, I'm like, it's pop, and pop has evolved. I like old pop. You know, like the Beatles were pop, you know, in their time. So it's like, pop's not a bad genre. No. It's just, but I think what really rubs me the wrong way with, like, obviously that radio country that you're talking about has been around for a long time, because She Thinks My Tractor's Sexy. I don't even know who sings that. I don't even, like...
Milli Vanilli?
Yeah. But I mean, that song's got to be from like 2000, 2001.
It's like early 2000s.
But, I mean, if that was turning me off that long ago, it's crazy that I listen to it now and I feel like somehow it's worse. And I think it's... Here's the weird thing. I usually love genre fusion, but I think it's the fusion of like hip hop beats. And I'm not talking about Old Town Road. That song bangs. I'm talking about like bands that they just have a southern twang on their voice, but it's a pop song.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. It's, you know, sometimes it works, those types of fusion, sometimes it doesn't. But you're right, it's all subjective, and you know, what someone else likes, it's not going to be what I like, you know? Yeah. And that's cool, you know what I'm saying? It takes a while to have that epiphany. You got to kind of grow up to, because I was the same way. I was like, fuck this, fuck that, you know, like you listen to that. I think that naturally happens when you're young, you know.
I've been going through something over the past couple of years because I also was the same way about metal forever, where I was like, I can't, and I used to listen to heavy music when I was younger, but then I got out of it. Like when I was in high school, me and my friends just listened to like jazz and funk and like psychedelic rock, and so basically I got like real heady. I guess I got I thought my music was way better, but I'm like, these people are just drug addicts, you know? Come on, dude.
Except for Frank Zappa, that dude stay clean.
And he's amazing. His music is not even like it transcends like.
It does.
I think I've said all that just to say that back when I was living in Auburn before I moved to Atlanta, and you and I would play the same kind of gigs, but not like right after each other. But I saw you.
Yeah, for sure.
I would listen to your music, and I enjoyed it. But I think at the time it was just like I wasn't looking for country. It was something when I would find it, I'd go, oh, that's awesome. Like that's good country.
Right.
Same thing with artists like Sturgill Simpson.
Sure.
First time it was like someone was playing it in a room, and I was like, who is this? You know, and but I wasn't seeking it out. And honestly, when I figured out that someone was country, I was like, it was like a weird turnoff. But then now I'm like, I don't really know why that was. But what stood out to me with your music and what made me gravitate towards it was the influence of religion. It was the influence of, your lyrics are not, they don't have the same flavor that some like outlaw country would have, because a lot of outlaw country ends up kind of sounding the same, where you go, okay, we get it, cocaine, pills, like this and that, but it's kind of like the same thing. I love what you've been doing, especially on your last couple projects of, you're pretty much like you're making a new kind of thing that I've never heard before. At least, I mean, I've seen it online described as cosmic country, but it's got like a psychedelic. That's also another word for cosmic. But
sure,
what is your opinion on cosmic country and religion and how all that stuff? I know I've rambled, and I'm sorry, that's not a good question. But dude, stop me from talking, please.
Okay, all right, it's actually a great question. So. Cosmic country, it's like, ultimately it's just another label, you know what I'm saying? Like it's a way to describe something. And so when I think of cosmic country, like, I think of Graham Parsons. Like I think of Flying Burrito Brothers. I think of those guys in the late 60s who took rock and roll, country music and psychedelic and put it all together, And so when I think of that, that's what I think of when I think of cosmic country, like the birth of it, started then. And there's been influences, since then. But, that's kind of like how I think of cosmic country, I guess. And then same way as you using the use of psychedelic sounds, the use of ethereal lyric, there's many ways to do it, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, does that answer?
Well, partially. Let's talk about religion then, because I think that it's honestly hard to talk about, psychedelia, without talking about religion, because I think it is a form of religion.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's related to, King Kesey and the acid test, which is the first time a lot of many Westerners experienced God. Mm-hmm. They had darshan with Christ by taking a tab of acid, you know what I'm saying? Like, and then they understood, like, oh wow, there's these different planes of consciousness out there, and I see how religion ties into that now. But the way that they experienced religion was the way a lot of us experience religion in the West, is through the medium of fear,
Yeah.
And it's an effective way to control somebody through your lens of your faith, but it's not an effective faith for the soul to grow in, because it's fear induced instead of love induced. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, with religion in the West, a lot of us get turned off by it because we're proselytized, looked down upon, do this or you're going to go to hell, and it doesn't make sense when you're a kid. I remember this. I remember going to church and hearing about hell, and it just didn't feel right in my soul, like it was like, why would all eternal loving being send you somewhere for eternity, no matter what you did for eternal? It just didn't make sense with me, I felt that as a child, which I think you're most pure as a child, you know what I'm saying?
I know that children still have developing brains that can't make rational decisions necessarily, but also adults don't make rational decisions that often. So it's kind of crazy when you think about it. Like you said, kids really sometimes they say the most honest thing because they're like, well, why would I lie about it? Or they're just very pure in that way. They don't.
Right. They haven't the society and the parents, teaching them, molding them, into, the rules of society. They haven't really got those rules yet. So they're more free as spirits, and we can learn a lot from children. Children are beautiful, you know what I mean? Like you're right. They don't see necessarily, like, okay, this person's different than me. Like, they naturally love each other. All kids love each other. You know what I'm saying? They're taught stereotypes. They're taught, all these things that, ultimately, keep them from growing. So, yeah,
the number one, kind of talking about psychedelia and religion and all that, the number one, like, if I had to sum up what I think, most people would say, like, what psychedelia is, or like psychedelic art, music, like what's it all getting at and everything. To me, the sentence I've heard from so many people is, everything's connected, we are all one.
Yeah.
And I like that it's there's not this pressure to explain it all. It's not that, like, there's not usually, and honestly, anybody who whether through the use of actual drugs or not, has like a psychedelic experience, because you don't have to use drugs to have a psychedelic experience.
You damn sure
You can be looking at a beautiful sunset and go, oh my God, I just realized that everything's connected, man.
I'm super high right now, but not chemically induced.
No, yeah, no, I've gone on runs before. Like, I used to go running a lot, and I had this like carpet in my room that had this like pattern in it. And I would come back from a 3-mile run on a hot summer day, and I would just look at the carpet, and I wasn't trying to...
And see it move.
But it would literally just look like a pond all rippling in towards itself. And I would just kind of like bask in it for a moment. And I was like, I am not on any substances at all right now. I'm literally just like, this is what your body does. I don't know if it's to reward you or what it is doing exactly, but but I guess my point is...
But you've seen that experience of piercing through the veil naturally.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's experiences that people don't... I'm sure since we're having this conversation, I know your I guess, history about psychedelic culture.
A little bit.
What I was going to say, Aldous Huxley. About him and
Brave New World. Yeah.
Yes. So but the book everybody always talks about, Doors of Perception, which is, the one where he talks about his experience in mescaline.
Where the doors got their name.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's interesting, though, when I bought that book, it has an essay in the back of it that's shorter. It's maybe like 20 pages or something, called Heaven and Hell. And this essay
I've heard of that before,
is like an addition to, it's kind of like on the same subject. But what's really cool is throughout the essay, he goes through history and examples of times when, like on a general larger sense, of times when people as a culture thought that they were seeing God, and in reality he was able to explain it through chemistry. He was essentially saying, like an example that I always bring up is that peasants during medieval times, they were so used to seeing like the absence of color or like vibrance in their life.
Right.
Like, their clothes were brown or black, or, they lived in the mud and the shit. They their whole life was just like bland.
Right.
But when they would go to church, they would see stained glass windows and they would see all the colors, and it was the colors that were essentially, it was the colors from the stained glass windows that they'd never really seen before. It was the incense, kind of giving them a smell, a sensory thing there. it was the Gregorian chants that have, I mean, which is beautiful. I mean, and even that can, like I said, give you like a psychedelic experience.
No doubt.
Because it sounds angelic. So I think what I'm saying is Heaven and Hell is really cool and you should check it out. It's a little bit easier to read because it's shorter. But it's just cool to see that throughout history, there's been times where a lot of people want to say like, I'm feeling God. And it's like, you might be, but also we need to talk about chemicals because there's these chemicals in your brain that are going haywire right now that you aren't acknowledging. And possibly that intoxication is being with God. I don't know. I mean,
it's a good point. I'm going to relate to that real quick because there's stories of the East, like in India and in the Far East, they call these people God intoxicants. They're people who in the West we would lock up because we'd say they're crazy. You know what I'm saying? But over there, they're actually like families will basically, there's a saint over there called Anandamoy Mai, and she would just be doing cartwheels for like 5 years, just full of God intoxicant. And there's families that take care of them, that feed them, that host them because it's a very noble thing to do. You know what I'm saying? So that's what's cool over there, I think, is they they give those people a place, just to be what they are, and they're not like, all right, you're crazy, we're going to lock you up, we're going to shoot you full of drugs, and you're going to have an even worse experience.
Well,
on that end.
Isn't it so weird that, and this is a thing throughout the world, but with different religions, where we live, Christianity is like the the norm, or it's what most people, what we see everywhere.
Right.
And I've heard, my parents or other people who are very devoutly Christian talk about other religions that I agree may sound a little funky, where they'll be like, can you believe they believe this? And then they'll talk, the ones that people always make fun of, like Scientology, for example, and like,
sure.
But it's funny when you look at it and you go, what you believe is not that far off. If you change, like if you look past the fact that Scientology is all about like aliens, if you replace it with like humans and like things that we related to more on Earth, people might actually not even understand the difference.
True.
It's just, but anyway, like I've been obsessed with religion ever since growing up. And ironically, I think, we're probably in the same boat on this. My parents, would love for me to still be Catholic, even though I'm not. But what they really did, though, was that by raising me with pretty strictly with like a religion that I ended up not believing in, it did set me on a path of searching. Because,
sure.
Maybe, is that something that you would relate to?
Yeah, grist for the mill, man. Absolutely. What's more profound, at least with my path, is like, I grew up in the Catholic faith. I really felt it deeply as a child, moved away from it, found, in the last 6 years of my life, found, Eastern Vedic practices, Theravada Buddhist practices, taken those practices, read those holy books, and then in turn, I've now come almost full circle, and I'm back at the Bible, and I'm understanding the Bible in a whole new light.
Yeah.
Because the folks in India love Jesus. There's actually stories about Jesus' lost years going to India to learn Kriya Yoga.
Interesting.
And they have documents over there about like how Jesus visited India and then came back. And so it's cool how it's just like, it's just, different paths to the same route. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's what we're kind of getting at, is that the whole point of this part of the conversation, why is it that religion is such a divisive thing when at its core it's supposed to be, and it's supposed to be unifying. And
right.
It seems like you have gravitated towards, in your lyrics and in your music, religions, though, that, Eastern religions are, in my opinion, a little bit less restrictive in terms of like, it's not all about don't do this, don't do this. It's more about, and the don't do's are more general. It's like, don't hurt your neighbor, and that's a pretty easy one to follow. It's not, don't eat meat on Fridays, because then you go, why? Right. It just, like things like that. And I hate the idea of anyone ever not, like as a kid, I don't feel like I was ever told like more of the meaning, or if I was kind of explained over the years more of like what we're doing in Catholic Church, I probably would have appreciated it more. But now I'm like, no, it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Yeah,
well, that's what happened. Folks get caught in the method. You know what I'm saying? They get caught in the method instead of, just doing it, and so, yeah, but you're right. There are a lot of, but there's a lot of arbitrary, rules and all that in Eastern religions too.
For sure, yeah.
I feel like what I got, at least from the Bhagavad Gita when I first read it, was like, or eventually what I got from it, because it took me many times, still blowing my mind, but basically what I got from the Bhagavad Gita was just like, experience God. Hey, these are paths to God, but experience it. Just don't read about it and believe it, just because someone gave it to you, or someone tells you to believe it. I liked how they put the emphasis on experiencing God, instead of just like, faith is a big part of it too, but it's faith with experience.
I think if I were to like sum up, how I feel about how I wish religion was in the world, I would say I wish that every single person had a different idea of the origin of the world and like what we're doing here and all of that. One thing that I don't really like, I guess, about organized religion, and I don't know if you relate to this, you probably do. I don't like like we've been talking about, the kind of us versus them mentality, the trying to recruit people, because the only thing I've ever wanted to recruit people for is to say, hey, don't be a piece of shit, and hey, be a nice person. I mean, at the end of the day, that's all I care about. Is if you I really don't know any other way to put it than just like, if you treat other people like you want to be treated, you should be fine. And I think a lot of the other stuff muddies up the waters and makes it confusing to people.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I mean, I remember one time, this is maybe something you can laugh at too. My mom and I went to a church when I was like a kid. It was like a new church we hadn't been to. We were on vacation or something. And she was, really got upset because she was talking to us afterwards, because she was like, they use white wine for the blood. And I was like, it's wine. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. And Mom, I'm not hating. I don't think you're watching these, but
God bless your mom, man.
But I think my point is, sometimes it's I mean, that seems like a funny thing, but it really is kind of, sometimes that is a good example of like
you're right,
the kind of things that people get upset about.
You're right. Yeah, it's just arbitrary stuff. It's just like, man, it happens all the time. You're right.
So kind of, I guess if you're okay with it, let's move off religion a little bit, because we've been talking about that so much.
We've been in it, man.
But I felt like it was, we'll segue this. I thought that it was a worthy conversation though, just because that encompasses a lot of your lyrics, a lot of, what I've heard from you, because
absolutely,
your album Lee County's Finest starts with, or at least the intro song, I think, has like some audio that's kind of creepy and Christian. It's
my Nana.
Wait, really?
Yeah, that's my grandmother.
Oh wait, no, I think I mean the man. That's there's a man's voice too, isn't there?
Are you talking about at the end of Still Living, right before Still Living? You talking about the preacher?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah, the preacher is who I'm thinking of.
Yeah, so that's a YouTube clip, right?
There. Okay.
Yeah,
it was a good one though, because it sets some like, ugh.
Oh yeah, man, it gives you the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
I really, when me and my friend of mine who helped me with those segues. We're like, yeah, we got to use this thing. It's just freak some folks out. Like, we got to do this.
Well, it just sounds, and it doesn't sound far-fetched. Like, that's the kind of stuff that, like, I'm thankful that Catholic Church isn't like that. They don't preach like that. They don't preach fire and brimstone.
Right.
But they are, the Catholic Church is, like, intellectually like that. Like, they're a little bit more academic about it.
Right.
They're not trying to prey on your emotions quite as much, I feel like. But anyway, but I feel like this is a good segue into talking about your music, though. Because, like I said, in Lee County's Finest, it seemed like talking about religion and talking about, and having the Eastern sounds was a kind of like an accent on it.
Right.
Whereas by now, the singles that I've heard from your upcoming album, those seem more steeped in it. Like this is like the main point,
Yeah.
And then, you know, kind of like adding on to that, your first EP didn't really seem to have much of that at all, like of either of those things. So talk to me about that progression then, because that's been about 6 or 7 years, I guess.
6 or 7, yeah. We put the EP out in 2016. So, yeah. So, I mean, basically, when Josh joined the band, like, I mean, like we pivoted from before that. That's kind of like right when we were starting the band. But before Josh joined, we did a year of shows with, you know, more of a like Americana indie type vibe. And then Josh joined the band, and it was like me and him fell down that rabbit hole together of hardcore honky-tonk and country music, you know, and that's where we found Hank Williams Sr. and Lefty Frizzell and Farron Young and all those great, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, the Bakers.
I love Buck Owens.
Man, me too. The Bakersfield Sound. So like when we made that record, that's what we were listening to, you know.
Yeah.
So that record came out of, you know, me and Josh's mutual going down that rabbit hole and wanted to do that. And so, and we cut that in Nashville in 2016, and then we waited a couple years, you know, to do Lee County's Finest. So when we did that one, we were, you know, naturally just expanding our influences and what we listened to. And even then I was kind of focusing on Eastern, you know, I was kind of in between. I was reading a lot of like, you know, classic Nietzsche and you know, and all that, Freud and all that, you know, all the German psychologists, you know, Carl Jung, you know, all that shit. And so, and those guys were focused on the subconscious, which naturally led to mysticism, which naturally I found a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and I was like, man, I want to go full in on this, and I want to do a record that brings Eastern sounds with Western sounds, Eastern twang with Western twang, you know, because that's what I saw it as at its most simple level, was just like, man, a sitar is just Eastern twang, you know, like maybe these things will go well with each other.
Yeah.
You know? And we tried it, and it was a crazy divine ass happening, man. Like, it was wild how it happened. Like, I mean, it's just stuff that, like, you know, that just felt natural, you know what I mean? Like, just magical stuff.
Yeah.
Like lining up, finding a sitar player in Alabama, you know.
Yeah.
One of my friends, Davis Little. You know Davis Little?
I feel like I know that name.
You know Little Rain Band?
From Birmingham? Yeah. Okay, yeah. I know who you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, so when they lived here for a while in 2013, 14, I met them, and I played bass in a bluegrass band me, Davis and Daniel had together called Chronic Grass.
Nice, that's hilarious.
Yeah. And so it came full circle. Davis is like, man, I got a sitar, like, you know, like, I was like, let's see if we can work this out, because Eastern scales are completely different than Western scales. Yeah. So it took us a few years to navigate that and figure out how do you blend both. So that's the evolution from first record to Krishna Country Gold, which will be released on the 18th or whenever.
Well, and that makes perfect sense. Like, listening to it, I really appreciate it, though, that there is like an evolution. Because honestly, when you're talking about something like, and you know, I'm not a well-versed country fan. I think I'm more well-versed in the kind of artist you were talking about. But, you know, the older sounds, like we talked off camera, or maybe on camera, I can't remember, but about country music and how, like, I go in and out of, like, you know, liking some of it.
Right.
Really, the best stuff to me is from, like, the 50s through the 70s.
Sure.
And I think that y'all do a good job of, like, capturing that kind of sound, but I don't think it's, like, a cookie-cutter copy. Like I'll...
Appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll throw an example in there. Space Texas, off your first EP. It... Like, you know, at parts of it, yeah, it's like definitely a country song, but then at other parts of it, you're like, this sounds like a Pink Floyd song, because it's very like and Josh, that's a compliment to you. Your guitar tone and your solo sounds like David Gilmour from Pink Floyd. It's very epic and had nice tone, like,
no doubt, dude.
But you know what I mean? And that is so cool to me when I bet there's people who watch y'all sometimes and they hear you maybe play a song like Still Living, and they're like, oh, I know this band's gonna sound like, you know, and then you pull out a song like Space Texas or like I'm trying to think of some of the newer stuff I'm sure is very psychedelic or cosmic. But I think my point is it's nice to be able to look back at your stuff and see that progression, but also be able to recognize that you've always been you, that you have always kind of had an ear for like, I want to make this stuff that's like influenced heavily by these artists, but it's your own thing.
Yeah, it's like building a house, you know what I'm saying? It's like with the EP, it's like, all right, let's build a foundation.
Yeah.
You know, like, all right, with the first full length, all right, let's put in the drywall and the siding, the insulation. And now we're getting to where like with this third record that we can like start, you know, getting the rooms, like, you know what I'm saying? Like start decorating, you know, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
that's awesome, yeah.
So if you look at it like that, it's like, man, yeah, it's kind of like building a house, trying to, because the whether it was conscious or not, like I've always wanted to like take parts of the last record and kind of like bring them in with, you know, where it might be like a cohesive listen from, you know, if you wanted to listen to the whole discography, you know what I'm saying? You're just hearing the evolution of stuff. And with my music, I've always tried to been like, whatever is going on in my life, like that's what I like to put through my music, because it's very cathartic, you know, that way.
Yeah.
And music as a method to work your shit out, you know, that works best that way that I do it for me. You know, it's like, man, this is good. This is good for my soul. You know, I need to work this shit out this way, and this is how I'm going to do it. And maybe some people don't want the band to go this way, but, you know, it's going to be what it's going to be.
This may be a daunting question, but do you have any kind of vision for, like, you know, if I were to say, I don't have to put a number on it, but like 5 or 10 years from now, like to be like, because you can look back now and say, oh, well, I started kind of on this path 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It's like, well, in another 5 years, is there anything that, you know, you will have wanted to accomplish, or, you know, something like that?
Man, that is a tough question because I've always just been with music more present than anything else in my life. You know what I'm saying? Like I've always been just like at the time, you know, I haven't really thought too much, like too far ahead, you know, maybe like, okay, now that we're done with this record, I'm already thinking about what I want to do with the next record. Yeah. Like I've already, but beyond that, no, like beyond like 5-10 years, what would be nice is just to keep playing the music that we want to make and playing them with my brothers and my sisters and traveling and getting to see the world. And if we're still doing that, then God bless, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because, but if I can't say, man, like, you know, part of me, like, this is not B.B. Palmer, but like, I want to make a hip hop record one day, you know, like obviously I wouldn't use B.B. Palmer for that vehicle, but like me, that'd be awesome, yeah. You know, outside of the band, I want to make like a, you know, like Wu-Tang influenced hip hop right here one day. So I thought about that, like, been like, you know, that far ahead, but with B.B. Palmer, it's just, you know, wherever the songs take us, I guess.
Well, I think I do want to maybe, I'm not saying this has to be, you know, me, but it would be awesome. I'm going to nudge you in the right direction of something. I think personally, and this might be because I'm a videographer and I do visual stuff a lot, but I think that when I go to see a concert, the visual component of seeing a band, and it could be just what someone's wearing, but I'm saying the visual component is huge. I love music, but these days you have to wow someone, you have to visually catch me to really catch my attention. No doubt. I think y'all would, and maybe not all the music, but some of the music I think would do really well with like projection visuals, whether it's psychedelic in nature or whether it's more, you know, like I've been to concerts where someone just has like footage of like flowers in a field while they're on stage, and I'm like, that puts me in a place. And so I think you know, my suggestion would just be that your music is reaching these heights, maybe find a way to visually represent some of the stuff too. And that's just you know, what I think would be cool. No, it's a beautiful thought, man. And honestly, like I would love to experiment with that. Like it's hard to do when you're traveling and playing places. Absolutely, like when you're like,
it's easier like to do that when you're planning a show like in around town, like or something like that. When you're on the road hitting different spots,
I totally understand.
You're traveling, through states. It's hard to do that. But I'll tell you one thing: if you like down the road, if there's a chance for us to work together, that'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say another thing. What I would love for this podcast to become one day. I originally started this podcast not wanting to do interviews. I actually wanted to do, it wasn't going to be a podcast. It was going to be, did you ever watch this thing that Adult Swim used to have online called Blood Feast?
No, I hadn't.
So it was like they ended it like last year or so. Blood Feast was this like online program where once a week they would have a band. Sometimes it was usually indie bands. They weren't like, people with, it wasn't anyone with like 100,000, 200,000 followers. Just bands that are maybe like, closer to like 10 to 20,000 followers. Right. But even people smaller than that from Atlanta usually. Cool. But they would have them come in and they would perform in the TBS studios, and basically it was like they would tailor it to the band. I can send you some links to some cool ones.
Yeah, send me some.
So like there's some bands where they're more slow and ballady, so they'll have just kind of like cool lights that kind of move slow. Right. But I have some friends that played on there where they have like kind of very psychedelic weird music, and so they would have like them perform in front of a green screen where they'd have visuals, or there are people who have had projections on them. So like they would kind of tailor it to like there's a metal band that like performed a ritual, like a ritual sacrifice kind of thing on there during their music. So like that's a lot, and that's like a big undertaking. But I originally started saying I want to like film 1 to 2 person producers or like musicians who played psychedelic music specifically like in my living room. And then it never worked out. Honestly, I don't have the knowledge and the equipment for like running sound for that. Yeah. That's the hard part.
And the space.
Exactly. But one day, so then I started this because this is pretty small. Right. One day I would love to have a big enough space to where you're sitting here with me, we're talking, and then we talk about a new song you have coming out, and then I'm like, okay, let's hear it. And then you like walk over there with your band, and then you basically can play it, and we record it all, and then you come back and sit with your band. Like, that's a lot to like think about, but I think that kind of thing is so cool because very cool. You get to see someone in an environment that is kind of perfected to hear them in their best, way, as opposed to like a live show. The room might sound like shit, but anyway, I think all that's to say, maybe one day if I have that kind of thing, you can come on here and perform some music. Dude, that'd be really cool. And
call me anytime, Pete, when you get that going.
Part of that would be that I have my visuals playing while the bands are playing. So like that's what I'm talking about.
That would rule. Yeah, that would be awesome, man. Yeah, and you could get there, like you get your sound set up, you get a good stage, you get a good space. Yeah. That's a good thing to work towards. Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to do it.
Yeah, man. Well, let's talk a little bit then because I think we are going to wrap it up in just a minute. But let's talk real quick though, because I just want you to get people excited about the new album.
For sure.
You only have 2 singles out from the album, right?
I do, and if you want to, after we get done with this podcast, I can play you a couple of the ones that are unreleased.
I would love that.
Not for y'all, just for people. All right, y'all got to wait till August 18th. By the time this podcast
I was going to say, by the time it comes out. So the podcast, or the album has come out at that point. But but at least, anyway, I just want to get people, I guess, excited. Is there anything other than, the religious influence that you want to tell people about it, like about its recording? Or, I mean, you've kind of gone over a lot of it through the podcast.
Yeah, for sure.
Just wonder if there's anything we left out that you want to be like, oh, actually, this one person's on this, and they're, or I don't know.
Yeah, like let me give props to all the people who worked on this thing. Yeah. Because it's more than any other thing we've ever done. I think I counted it out. I think it was like 15 people.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, for Krishna Country Gold to happen, it was a 2.5 year process. I mean, it was a long time. Yeah. Just for 5 songs, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So let me give props to the people who made it happen out there real quick. I'm just going to run down.
Go for it. Yeah, take your time.
JP, John Paul Malpus in Montgomery, who runs a studio called Seven Bridges Recording Studio, who's a good friend of ours. donated all his time and effort for pro bono. So God bless JP. He helped me along. Him, me, and Wade Allen, who's an engineer in town, who engineered the Lee County's Finest record.
Nice.
Us three basically spent 2 years mixing down these songs. So shout out to both of those guys because it wouldn't happen without them. Obviously, the core band. Got to thank Josh, my main right hand. That's my brother, man. That's my brother. He is B.B. Palmer with me. Like, he's the essence of B.B. Palmer. And if he weren't in it, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do B.B. Palmer anymore without Josh. So, but Josh obviously helped a ton. Taylor, she sang on it. There's a duet song that me and her do on it. So
nice, yeah.
Johnny Verez from Electric Blue Yonder. I don't know if you know Johnny is.
I don't think so.
But he's a mad genius, and he helped me a lot with the arrangements. He brought in the fiddle player, Kim Cookie Powers. She's up north Alabama, Muscle Shoals.
Nice.
Session player. She's really good. She played on it. Jonathan Avant, Martin Sager, the horn section on the singles y'all you heard that are out. My drummer, Penn Zephyr, God bless you. And Blake Robbins played bass on it. And let's see, Brett Robinson donated some vocal mics for us. Pat Patton mastered it. The artwork was done by Maduka Mukashan from Sri Lanka.
Nice.
So we got someone halfway around the world, to do a record, with Vedic influence from India. So that was cool. Just all the people involved, man. It was crazy. Like, it's crazy how blessed, this whole project has been. So, yeah. So it comes out August 19th. By the time this podcast comes out, it'll be released. Yeah. So it'll be on all streaming platforms and all that good shit. And we'll have vinyls probably end of this year.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a really good time talking to you. I feel like we could go on for hours, and we'll definitely have you back on. But real quick, you can follow PsychoActivision on TikTok and Instagram at PsychoActivision. You can, find PsychoActivision Presents on YouTube. And again, you can listen to Krishna Country Gold coming out on August 19th on all platforms. So, dude, thanks again. And I can't wait to listen to the album.
Oh, man. God bless you. Thank you, Pete. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thanks.
Sweet.